When Hamas, the terrorist organization that has governed poverty-stricken Gaza Strip since June 2007, sent its fighters into Israel on October 7th, it unleashed a bloodbath, the likes that have not been seen in decades in war-weary Middle East. What was most disturbing about the Hamas killers was the invocation of Allah's name as they slaughtered innocent Jews. No one was spared, not children, including babies in their cribs, not women, and not the elderly. Israel's initial shock in the aftermath of the massacre soon evolved into a single resolve: the elimination of Hamas, with the strong support of the United States and other democratic nations. Israel's unrelenting bombing of Gaza and the incursion of ground troops in a search and destroy mission of Hamas's leadership and fighters has left no doubt that this will be a prolonged war. The threat from the terrorist group to kill almost 200 hostages they took during the attack on various locations inside Israel, including an open-air concert, has not deterred Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government. So, what now? Will the Battle of Gaza trigger an escalation of violence in the West Bank, the Palestinian territory governed by the Palestinian Authority? Will Hezbollah, another terrorist organization that operates in Lebanon, across Israel's northern border, decide to also wage war on the Jewish state? Time will tell. Indeed, there is an overarching question that has preoccupied all peace-loving people for many, many years. Is there a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I'm Bertram de Souza, host of the Scribbler Video podcast and retired editorial page editor and Sunday columnist of the now-closed Youngstown Vindicator. My two guests today are individuals with extensive knowledge of the political, social, and cultural life of Israel. Bonnie Birdman, Executive Director of Community Relations and Government Affairs with the Youngstown Area Jewish Federation, and Ilan Aharoni, an Israeli tour guide, who along with other guides are called, quote, professors of the land because they are highly trained and educated. After years of writing about and observing the conflict in the Middle East as a dispassionate journalist, today's war has become personal. A close relative of mine is in the eye of the storm. I'll talk about that in my closing remarks. Ilan and Bonnie, thanks very much for joining me in this to talk about this very, very sad and dangerous situation in Israel. To set the tone, let me read what Prime Minister Netanyahu said today when he met with President Biden, who flew to Tel Aviv to be with the Israelis, with the members of the Israeli government, to sort of talk about America's unwavering support of Israel. And here's what Mr. Netanyahu said to Biden. He says, "You described what Hamas did as sheer evil. It is exactly that." And then he went on and said, "Hamas murdered children in front of their parents and parents in front of their children. They burned people alive. They raped and murdered women. They beheaded soldiers. They searched for the secret hiding places where parents hid their children. And just imagine, Mr. President, the fear and the panic of those little children in their last moments as the monsters found out their hiding places." You know, when I read that, and when I heard that first and then I read it, it was just, you know, sort of chilling to hear that. And so, given that the way the Prime Minister described the situation, Ilan and Bonnie, I'd like to ask you to describe your feelings when you first found out about what was going on. How you felt, what went through your mind, what went through your heart. And let me start with you, Ilan.
When I will tell you that the end of this question is that I still don't know how I feel. When we found out what was going on, it was a Shabbat morning early on. There was a siren as Jerusalem was being targeted. And my wife and girls were already up. They woke me up. And they told me, my wife told me, because we have young kids, my wife told me that something bad happened south. She was already following. And then we started seeing the videos, seeing the pictures while making sure the kids don't know what's going on. And it's too much for any human being to look at. And because I'm parenting and because, unfortunately, my personal experience with war, and I've been a soldier in Jenin in 2002, lost a lot of men. And I know that I have to stop the gate flood of all these emotions because I have duties. Life has to go on. And so I'm allowing a few stories every day because I also can't ignore what's going on. I'm doing live updates from here regularly because I have a lot of clients and friends in the United States, so I need to be updated. And I don't know if anybody can find a balance, but it's shocking to a point that I have sleepless nights where I'm afraid. That's when the emotions come because I don't parent. My duty is over. And my wife said, "Why aren't you sleeping?" I said, "I can't." And then that's what I can tell you. It will take us years and years to even understand a little bit.
Bonnie, you've traveled to Israel a lot. You've been very active in the Jewish community in the Mahoning Valley and even in the state and nationally. Mm-hmm. What was your initial reaction when you first heard the news?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for having us. You know, first of all, I will say that my reactions and the reactions of the Jewish community locally, nationally, throughout Ohio has been of shock, dismay, and yet we still, as horrible as we feel and as shocked as we feel, we still can't feel exactly what our brothers and sisters and family and friends are feeling in Israel right now. How did I feel at the beginning? Initially, it seemed as if it was just a little something on the border that occurs quite frequently. In fact, I was there in Israel last year with a group of state senators at a time when Hamas was sending rockets into Israel. I literally landed at Ben Gurion Airport and the sirens were still going off. It was a 48-hour situation. I knew it was going to be fine. We were all safe and we had a wonderful experience in Israel. As I started to see what was happening, as I started to watch the app that I have on my phone and my Apple Watch, it's a red alert app that says when there are rockets coming into Israel, when there are terrorist incursions, it says where they are. It gives advance warning to all people in Israel. I keep that app on my phone. All of a sudden, it started blowing up in ways that was not expected. And usually, there's information about something that's going to happen in advance. So I knew then and there it was something that was so far out of the ordinary. And yet my initial reaction still wasn't enough because the news that keeps coming out is even more and more horrific. And, you know, you just read the statements from Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I can tell you as American Jews, we are so thankful for the bipartisan support that we are seeing for Israel and for the Jewish community across the country, whether it be in Washington, in Columbus, and in communities across the country. It is unequivocal and it is strong. And that is something that we're here in the United States going to keep working on doing, because what we're seeing here just becomes, you know, the stories are even more and more horrific.
And Ilan, you served in the military.
Every Israeli does. So yes.
What Prime Minister Netanyahu described is so horrific. This was not. This is. I mean, you did not sort of experience anything like this at all, did you, when you were serving?
When I served, I experienced some of the worst incidents in Israel, personally. in the Israeli military back in 2002. But to answer your question, which is very important, this is the biggest terror attack on Jews since World War II. So absolutely, this is the worst. We have never seen anything like that. And so it's way bigger than the biggest we ever had. We were in the tens, now we're in the thousands.
Yeah, and as both President Biden and the Prime Minister pointed out, when you have 1,400 dead out of a population of 10 million, that's a huge number. And so even though there's a comparison to 9/11, where there was somewhere around 3,000 somewhat who died in a population of ours, sort of you then see the ratio and you see how dramatic it is and how devastating it is to the people of Israel. And you made mention of World War II. And Bonnie, I'll ask you this. Shortly after I arrived at the Vindicator in '79, I was assigned to cover the commemoration of the Holocaust at the Jewish Community Center. And of course, there were the two well-known messages, lest we forget, and then never again. And as a reporter, I wrote the story, sort of objectively, but not emotionally. And then I had a chance to go and visit the concentration camps. And I have to say, even as a dispassionate journalist, it sort of put in perspective what the Jews around the world, and especially in Israel, feel when they are under attack this way. So could you put that in sort of in perspective of a leading member of the Jewish community?
Yeah, sure. So I think that's a pretty accurate way of saying it. So in one of my more recent trips, I was with a group of actually additional state legislators from the State House, and we did visit Yad Vashem, the Israeli National Memorial and Museum to the Holocaust. It's an absolutely incredible facility. The experience is overwhelming. And we were privileged to meet with the director of Yad Vashem, and that position is a prime ministerial appointment. It isn't just someone who interviews and gets the job as a head of a museum. It is a very important position. And the gentleman who has that job is Danny Dayan. He was a former consul general to for the state of Israel at the New York consulate, which covers Ohio. So we know Danny very well. And one of the things he said, and I think it stuck with a lot of the folks who were on the trip, and it always sticks with me, is Israel doesn't exist because of the Holocaust. Israel exists in spite of the Holocaust.
Right.
And I think that kind of sums it up, because as a people for millennia, we have been attacked. We have, been subjected to slaughter, and yet we keep fighting back because our resilience is strong and our commitment to life is stronger than anything else. And then for the first time in 1948, despite the greatest of odds, the Jewish people had a state. And we as American Jews had something to look toward, to know that we, along with Jews in Israel, had something to represent us and stand up for, and to say no more, never again. And so when something like this happens, despite all of it, the efforts over the years since 1948, 75 years of Israel's enemies trying to wipe it off the planet. Because remember, all of this is not about a conflict. This is about slaughtering Jews and trying to wipe Israel off the map. If you want to talk about a conflict, you want to talk about peaceful resolution, people living side by side, we can all have that conversation. And I think, in our community, certainly in Youngstown and throughout the American Jewish community, we've supported the notion of two people living side by side. Right. We're not out there celebrating the raping of women and the beheading of babies. That's not what we do. That's not what we are about. We are here because we believe in life, and Israel stands for life. And that's part of the emotion that we're certainly feeling here at home. And again, I'm not there now. I mean, there's a part of me that wants to be there, but of course we
Yeah.
can't. And I just can't imagine fully what our Israeli family is experiencing now. But here at home, it's resonating. And last thing I can say is just, you're a journalist. You covered so many things.
Right.
You're a columnist. You tend to know things one way or the other based on your gut
Right.
after doing the work that you do in any particular area you're writing about. And look, we know what you've covered for many, many years. But at the end of the day, I know that this has shaken our community here locally and throughout Ohio and throughout the United States like nothing that has ever happened before, except for World War II. And I wasn't alive during World War II. So for me personally, this is the greatest shock to the system as a Jewish person that I've ever felt.
Yeah, and in that regard, Ilan, being in Israel at this moment, do you and other Israelis view Hamas, which is a terrorist organization that has governed Gaza since 2007, do you believe that Hamas represents the people of the Palestinians, the non-political Palestinians? And if you do, and if other Israelis do, hatred and retribution and vengeance are human traits. And therefore, in that regard, is there do you have any sort of feeling that this thing can be settled through negotiation instead of through military force?
First of all, for your first part of the question, what we can tell what the Palestinian people feel is that are what we know of facts. The people of Gaza voted democratically in 2007 Hamas to be their government. And then what we also know about the Gaza Strip is that Hamas eliminated violently anybody who would be in their opposition, meaning supporting of the PLO party that is now governing the West Bank. We also know what we saw last night in many areas of the West Bank, support of Hamas. And Israel, because it's not just, we don't just operate with Hamas negotiation-wise, we also have a lot of intelligence forces, and we have to combat Hamas operatives, I should say terrorists, and not whitewash it. We have a lot of intelligence, and absolutely the heart of the Palestinian people supports Hamas. This is what we have to work with. Now, all this conversation about peaceful negotiation and stuff like that happened for many years. And the majority of what I see on Israeli social media is even the most liberal. Two-state solution, right. Palestinian rights will solve the problem type of people. There is a sad understanding that it cannot be solved peacefully. It varies in Israeli population between should it be limited to Gaza or go to the West Bank. Israel is not going to attack the West Bank unless it's being attacked out of the West Bank.
Right.
And so that the Palestinians of the West Bank should determine for themselves. With Gaza, every Israeli official that you'll speak to, and you quoted Netanyahu, he was hours after the events, before we even sent one aircraft to bomb Gaza, and he already said, we're in a war and we're going to destroy Hamas. So that's the answer to your second part. Hamas, Israel tolerated and contained a lot of Hamas violence. And if you go back to the different conflicts that Bonnie was describing, sometimes, a little skirmish, but mainly the recent one was 2014. Israel always agreed to stop bombing Hamas before we achieved our military goals. That's answering your questions, in hopes of rebuild for the Gaza Strip, in hope that this time Hamas will do right by its own people. It didn't, and the poor, miserable, really, children, and I'm not saying this sarcastically, that we stopped bombing at 2014, came out of Gaza last Saturday and did these atrocities that I don't want to be too graphic, and I don't want to generate like I'm in a victim mentality, but these atrocities are game changers, and they have to be dealt with differently. We can't go back to the old.
And this is for both.
I'd like to add one thing, though, Bertram. I think it's interesting, and it's some reports that are coming out now over the last couple of days. Elon mentioned it a little bit to me a day or two ago, and I've seen some of it now in English media. So, things were starting to potentially improve. I don't want to suggest that peace was breaking out all over, but we saw what was happening. Normalization was starting to take place. And let's face it, from a geopolitical perspective, I think it's very interesting that President Biden was in Israel today on the same day that Vladimir Putin was in China. Sure. I don't think there's any. I think there is some significance to that, but more importantly, from the regional perspective, a strong Israel is so important to stave off the terrorists, to stave off the influence of Iran, and that was beginning to happen. And, you keep hearing these, the line that Israel has created this open air prison, and that has, is imprisoning Gazans. And that couldn't be the furthest thing from the truth. Number one, over the years, billions upon billions of dollars have gone into Gaza to develop their infrastructure and build up a society. That money has been taken by Hamas. It's built up their military, and it doesn't help the people. As recently as in the last, several weeks before the attacks, there were people from Gaza who daily would go into Israel to work, because that's what it is. It's a very normal thing. And now we've been learning that those are the people that were surveilling the neighborhoods and the communities in the South, taking pictures of the homes. They knew who was in each home. They knew if there were elderly there. They knew how many children lived there. They knew if there were dogs there that they would have to tend to. So the people who are actually citizens who come to work were really there being terrorists. And so when you hear proportional response, or, Israel doing what it's doing in Gaza and causing a humanitarian crisis, it's not Israel. It's Hamas that is doing the disservice to their own people. Right. And it is Hamas that is causing this crisis. And it's Hamas that has to be eliminated. And
acknowledging your both of you, your deep sense of anger and, sort of shock as to what has occurred, especially as when there are, children and the elderly and women who were massacred. I've got to ask this. There are now reports that there are children and babies and elderly and women from Gaza who have also died. The hospital where there was, sort of an errant rocket that fell and killed 500. A lot of them, a lot of the people who died were sick people. Is it too early to expect each of you to have sympathy for those victims?
I'm going to answer that one first. And Ilan, you'll think about your response in a second. But first of all, to suggest that there isn't sympathy by Israel and by Jews for the victims is completely a distortion of the truth. So let's look at a couple of things you brought up. Several days ago in the Chicago area, there was a horrific incident where a Palestinian woman and her son were attacked. And the little boy died, and the mother is still in critical condition. Horrific situation. And we joined in with Jewish community leadership from across the nation, put it on our social media that we absolutely condemn that. There's no place for that kind of violence. And we stand by that. We've always had sympathy for those who get caught up in the crossfire, so to speak. And horrific. And we are urging people to be calm. And anyone who thinks they're doing any favors by attacking Palestinians or anyone of Muslim descent is not doing anybody any favors. They are absolutely wrong, and we condemn that and urge against it. And if we hear anything about that, we report it to the authorities to hope to prevent it. So that's number one. Number two, you talk about the hospital and 500 people dying. Let's face it, the news has been made pretty clear. That was not any, Israel was not targeting a hospital. Israel was not operating in that area. Hamas shoots off rockets from hospitals, from schools, from playgrounds, from apartment buildings. And so for Israel to neutralize this, it has to do certain things that Hamas capitalizes on. This was a rocket that went awry, or ordnance that went awry. It was apparently sent by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another terrorist organization, and it blew up in a parking lot adjacent to the hospital. So two things. Actually, there are 3 points to that. Number one, it was in a parking lot. It didn't hit the building. If anybody was killed tragically in the building, it's because their own weapons blew up as a result of the rocket hitting. That's number one. Number two, 500 people died is not confirmed at all, and that number is most likely largely inflated. And number three, the Gaza Health Ministry that puts out this information is Hamas. So take all of that with what you will. So I just want that to be clear. And then finally, to address your question, of course, there is tremendous sympathy for those who are suffering right now. And to suggest anything otherwise, and to hear our neighbors and members of our local community saying otherwise, how disappointed they are in the Jewish community for not supporting Palestinians. Nothing could have been further from the truth. So I think from that perspective, it's important that people understand certainly where the American Jewish community is, where the Youngstown area Jewish community is. Now, Alana, I'll let you address that from your perspective in Israel, because I think that's the one that's really important.
Go ahead, Alana.
First of all, I want to say that I'm very impressed with you, Bonnie, because you know the facts as accurate as it could get. And I admire you for that, for being so involved. To me, in Israel, looking to American Jewry, of course, I know you're a friend, but you're a representative of American Jewry. To know that you do not let the lies that you mentioned, the propaganda of Hamas, is fantastic to me. That it's a heartwarming experience. I will address the sympathy first. I do have sympathy for anyone who understands life is more important than that. And then I look every day to the messages that the Israeli army is sending to the citizens of Gaza, we're going to bomb here, go bomb there.
Right.
Go move over there, move south now, which these are the requests. We have a routine that no army in the world has, which is called knock on the roof. We send a dead bomb to hit that house. It does nothing to the house, but shake it a little bit and let the people know that this house has been targeted. We have our military calling people in Gaza and asking them. We don't only throw bombs on Gaza, we also throw pamphlets telling the people of Gaza who have no freedom of speech, meaning we could not know if they are pro or anti-Hamas, because they will be killed if they express their anti-Hamas opinions. And we tell them in any way possible to us during a war that is important to us, because of what happened last week, we still think about those that do not want to be caught in the cycle of violence. And so we show sympathy, not as just personally me, if you're asking about my emotions, of course. I'm a parent. I feel akin to any parent out there that wants to protect their kids, always. And having said that, I have to say something. Hamas did not produce its own terrorists by itself. The population of Gaza celebrate in majority, and that's a sad and very heartbreaking thing to say, and celebrates the violence. In the hours before Israel started attacking, in the hours before Hamas realized that them releasing the pictures and the videos of their own atrocities,
Right,
and they celebrated. Then it backfired on them big time. And because we mentioned World War II, I have to say something that quote something or tell you about something that I read yesterday. Hamas is different than the Nazis, because the Nazis tried to hide their crimes very hard. They worked in hiding. Hamas celebrated those until it backfired and it damaged their own propaganda. And so if a mother dresses her son with a model of an explosive belt, or if a video that I showed today, the kids playing with another kid that is dressed in Israeli military and they're executing them, I don't blame the kids. I blame the culture that gets these kids into this situation and creates heroes for them to imitate. And later on, these kids, they are directed to that. So, and then they end up killing, burning babies and raping.
Ilan, do you have Palestinian friends? I know Bonnie does.
Yes, absolutely I do.
And so what is the conversation right now between you and your Palestinian friends? What's the conversation go as far as talking about what's happening now?
I'm a tour guide here in Israel, and the tourism business in Israel has no borders. We work with Arabs all the time. And Saturday, of course, I couldn't call anyone. But my first phone to anyone, any colleague, was to my very good friend. He drives most of my tours now.
Uh-huh.
His name is Tariq Ghanem. And I called him. Nothing really had to be said. I said, listen, I know it's going to be a while before I see you. We didn't know how long, we still don't know how long it's going to be before we see tour groups and tourism back to life here. And he just said, this is really bad. Meaning, people shouldn't do these things. And so that's on a personal level. But, you know, this is my friend, this is my first phone call. I did that. It goes without saying. I have my kids' school have Arab teachers. I saw them today, and they're great teachers. So we're smiling. Anyone who's wanting to work, to live, to educate here on these values that promote life and not death is my friend. But I also want to expand my answer to your question because I think it will interest the audience. And we do not see a lot of Israeli-Arab violence. There could be many reasons to why. But in 2019, during COVID, sorry, in 2021, 2020, during COVID, there was the biggest riots Israeli Arabs did on Israel with lynches to people, with burning of a lot of businesses. It was terrible. And we believed here in Israel that the next war, which we're experiencing now, is going to have the Israeli Arab population attacking Jews in the streets. We still are wary. I'm not going to tell you that it's all perfect, but the amount of violence coming from Israeli Arab is surprisingly low during this conflict. And we need to know that one of the casualties in the Jerusalem area is an Arab guy killed by Hamas rockets in the village of Abu Ghosh, a special village that was always friendly. This is where we go, because a lot of Jewish businesses are closed on Saturday. This is where we go have lunch and, hang out. Never, ever did they have violence. They experienced multiple casualties in different conflicts, including this. From the Palestinian side. So, absolutely, we have connections with everyone who is life-seeking person. It doesn't matter their nationality or their religion. Question is, are you a tribe of life or a tribe of death?
Right. And Bonnie, has the Palestinian community in the Mahoning Valley reached out to the Jewish community at all to try and actually have a dialogue as to what's going on?
There have been some communications. Honestly, I can't say that there's been an effort to have any dialogue right now. I think that there's a lot of anger out there on, members of both communities. There's a lot of hurt. And what we're seeing, certainly in some aspects of the community, is what we see as a celebration of terrorism, a celebration of, praising this great victory against the evil Zionists. We're seeing that in our community. We're seeing it as recently as today. So in general, and officially, there hasn't been any broad conversations, but there's been a lot of one-on-one conversations. But I will say that the community, at least the local Palestinian community, we don't feel threatened by them. Right. I hope that they don't feel threatened by us. We have had events that have been peaceful. They have held events that have been peaceful. Law enforcement has been alerted from both communities in advance of the events to ensure that they're peaceful. And I think that shows a lot of mutual respect amongst members of our community, because we're neighbors. We all live together in the Mahoning Valley, and we share the same values in many ways. They want to, raise their children and, have their businesses and live the life that we all want to live the life. They look to support the Mahoning Valley as much as we do. And we pride ourselves in being very, very good citizens of the Mahoning Valley and doing, work that far surpasses the size of our community for the betterment of the greater community. And we know that the local Arab and Muslim community shares in those values.
And for years, the interfaith dialogue that was held with all of the, Jews and Arabs and Catholics and the Christian, was very successful in bringing the community together, and did well with that. And Bishop Malone was one of the people, and the rabbis, were very much actively involved in that. And you're right. I mean, there hasn't been the kind of anger and demonstrations that we've seen in other cities. But Ilan, let me ask you about what everybody's anticipating, or at least the media is anticipating, which is the invasion by ground troops into Gaza. I have watched the Netflix series Fauda, that is a fictionalized version of the special forces, Israeli forces, and how they operate and all of that. And I remember a couple of segments about them going into Gaza. And what struck me, and I know it's fictionalized, and I know it's that, but what struck me was, how dangerous that whole area is, because the alleyways and the streets are so narrow, and you could, once you get in, you might get stuck and you can't out. And then there are this high-pitched whistles that lookouts use to communicate, which is really eerie. And so my question to you as ex-military is, what would the Israelis face if there is such an invasion, or if there's such a ground invasion in Gaza?
Nothing of the sort.
Pardon?
This is what we experienced. This is what we experienced for myself. The event that I participated in, it's a famous event, so it's on Wikipedia. And in the refugee camp in Jenin, this is exactly, they knew where we were coming. They had sophisticated, very, very low-tech whistles, etc., ways of communication, and this is what brought the tragedy that I participated in. What is happening to this landscape now in Gaza is it's being decimated by our aircrafts. That's only the top, the icing on the cake. If I know it's a terrible allegory, but that's the first one that came to mind. It's only the crust of what's really going in Gaza. And all the cement that Israel sent into Gaza over the decades that Hamas is controlling it has been turned into bunkers, into attack tunnels,
Right.
into smuggling tunnels. And those bunkers are under hospitals in Gaza.
Right.
And that's, by the way, the main reason why Hamas leaders don't want us to, and this is why they scream bad when Israel may have, they thought for themselves, may have attacked the hospital. It's not because they care about the sick, they care about themselves. They are hiding under these people. And so when we go in, we will have to find a way to eliminate the threat of the underground Gaza. And I listened just before I came online. I always try to keep myself updated on what's going on. Former Prime Minister Bennett is working a lot, going down to the south, talking to soldiers, talking to communities. And he said it out loud. Now, he is not in the decision-making process now, but he was there a year ago. And he says that the level of fire that is going to be shot at every house before we go in is going to be something that is unprecedented. Quoting him is better than my own simple opinions. Forget my military experience. I can quote a former prime minister on this. It's much more credible. And we will have to see.
And so we'll continue to see the death toll and injury, people getting hurt and injured rise, which raises the final question that I have, since we're almost an hour, but I do appreciate the time. When President Biden was in Tel Aviv, he again mentioned the two-state solution. Israelis and Palestinians living side by side in peace. But as a cynical journalist, I have to say that it almost seems that it is a pipe dream now. And it's going to be a very long time before emotions are settled enough that, you know, the Palestinians and the Israelis, you know, could really sort of bring themselves to say, yeah, we can live together. So in light of that, and perhaps I'm being overly cynical, but in light of that, Bonnie, what other options are there? And I ask you because you've studied this a long, long time, and you've been there and you've been on the ground. What other options?
Well, the first option is that Hamas needs to be defeated. Remember, you know, a little while ago, you asked, is there any possibility of negotiation? That would be akin to saying, you know, we need to, you know, settle a few minor differences with ISIS, and then we can, you know, move on to other things. Hamas is the same as ISIS. There is no negotiating with them because their very reason for existence is to wipe Jews off the face of the earth and to eliminate Israel. It's right at the beginning of their founding document. So first and foremost, that has to happen. Second, you know, from the outside looking in, and I can't presume to fully know because I don't live there, but, you know, we know many who do, and we have Ilan on with us. But it's going to, like you said, it's going to take a long time. This has shaken the core of certainly Israel and in the Jewish world like we've never seen. The time to heal once the hostilities are over and once, you know, Israel has completed its mission will take decades, if not generations. Does a solution need to be reached? Of course. Was a solution in the works in the past? Absolutely. But what happened? Why have we not seen a solution for, some say 75 years, some say, you know, since 1967 at the end of the Six-Day War. You can look at all the different timing. You can look at, you know, the allegations that Israel has been occupying the people for 75 years. That's all propaganda for the notion of destroying Israel. So you look at all of that and you think, okay, you have people living in the same communities, living in the same region. There has to be an acceptance on the side of the Palestinian people to accept Israel, and eventually the fear, the very justifiable fear on the part of Israelis that living side by side can't work, has to eventually be dissipated. And let's face it, that justifiable fear was a reality, and we just saw that reality on October 7th. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, I didn't just choose these words or that answer off the top of my head. There is a journalist, a Palestinian journalist who lives in Jerusalem. He's an Israeli citizen, writes for the Jerusalem Post, named Khaled Abu Tuameh. Khaled has been on the ground for years and years, probably older than I am, and, you know, has seen it all. He's the guy who international media will call to go into Gaza, you know, when they were able to go to Gaza, or go into Ramallah and do the interviews and cover the stories. And he very simply puts it when he is asked the question, why is there no peace? And it's exactly what I just said. I paraphrased him. Number one, no leadership on the side of the Palestinian people. Number two, because of the lack of leadership, no education of the people to prepare them for peace. There are no other World War II refugees, such as they, you know, may have existed on the planet, except for Palestinian people who claim that Israel has been occupying them. And they've been educated over generations to hate Jews and to hate Israel. And finally, the third piece is this justifiable fear of the Israelis. And so first and foremost, to even start to tackle those very difficult issues, there's one more important pressing one, and that's Hamas. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing happening over the coming weeks.
And Ilan, you being there, how realistic is a two-state solution? And if not that, what does the future hold?
It's the million-dollar questions, and I think it's a question that belongs to the days before October 7th. And what happened in October 7th has to change the reality. It has to change the conversation. Israel can no longer agree. The citizens in the kibbutzim that were burnt and looted and destroyed will not go back to their kibbutzim to rebuild them, which is going to be a very painful rebuild, unless they can feel safe there, because they, for years and years, lived on the border, and they never believed what Hamas told them that Hamas is going to do. Hamas was very clear about what they were going to do to us if they ever get the opportunity. It's not a fear, it's believing your enemy. And that's what the enemy says he's going to do, and they did it. They acted on it in the most brutal way possible. And so I think what the population in Israel will tell you in general, and then I'm trying to focusing on being balanced and not giving each of the political side, and of course they are here, but what you will find agreement between the people I'm talking to is that the conversation needs to change.
Right.
And this is going to be the watershed. Anything that's going to happen needs to be weighed against, is this going to prevent the next terrible massacre? It has to.
Right.
We will not allow, it's not so much fear, it's our duty. We promised when the state of Israel was created, never again.
Right.
We meant the Holocaust. We failed on October 7th on this promise. So now we have to make sure that we never fail again. You're going to see a change in the conversation that is always going to remind, we are a people that never forgets.
Right. Well, thank you both very much. Ilan, I wish you and your family safety, and pray that everything works out. Bonnie, again, a pleasure. Great talking to you, and we'll be in touch on the other issues we had talked about, hopefully. But again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Nice to be here.
Balance is important in discussing this emotionally charged issue, so I'll be inviting representatives of the Palestinian community to share their views. Now for the details of my personal connection to what's going on in Israel. My cousin's son, David de Souza, is the Canadian representative to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. David is a veteran Foreign Service officer who has had 2 postings in Lebanon and has also served in Venezuela, the Philippines, and in Kenya, East Africa. I sent David an email asking how he was doing in that highly volatile part of the world. Here's his reply in part. Quote, "My team and I are safe. I'm focused on assisting Canadians in need of help and working with Canada's embassies in Tel Aviv, Beirut, Amman, and Cairo to keep our government informed of how Canada can help with the conflict and humanitarian situation here." He declined to delve into the political aspects of the war. David's father, Dr. Terry de Souza, his mother Wanda, his sisters Catherine and Elizabeth live in Canada. His brother, Dr. Jonathan, is in Australia. Jonathan has been a guest on the Scribbler podcast discussing his kidney transplant in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Bertram de Souza, wishing you well.